Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Reality Check Podcast. Affordability, reality versus messaging. That is tonight's topic. And it is appropriate as we speak. The president is addressing a crowd in a very raucous, energetic crowd in Pennsylvania. They're talking about affordability, and we'll keep an eye on that and maybe chime in once in a while, give you a little bit of the Chiron. But basically, it is a battle, and it really is between his policies. Are they going to work? The outlandish efforts of the opposition to do anything and without any regard for the pain they're inflicting on the American people to slow and to prevent, if they could completely stop any of the beneficial policies from taking effect that can be felt by the average American, and then messaging it in that sense where the magic trick is we effed everything up for 4 years. You idiots came back for 10 months and we're going to blame you for it. How do you like them apples?
Yeah.
And we're counting on enough people holding you accountable.
Mhm.
That's a good place to take off. And later on, I'll get into, I see a bit of a Cloward and Piven, where you overwhelm a system so much that the thing you are overwhelming is not able to recapacitate and to recover and to implement a reply to what you're doing, a response. I think there's some of that here. So I'm going to go. I'm joined tonight by, I have a new cat and dog, Marcus, no longer formerly unemployed Marcus, and Raul Mas, who is not using any acronyms.
No,
All
no
right.
acronyms.
New
Keep it
monikers,
simple.
just the real deal. But anyhow, let's go with Marcus, and please feel free to chime in on tonight's what I think is the number one topic in the nation, and I think will continue to be through the midterms.
Well, one, I think the Republicans have like a bad messaging problem, as you alluded that uh, it we're Trump is trying to fix a lot of Biden's problems, and but you get like bad actors, whether it's the media, social media, or bots, shifting a narrative, and then you get people who are easily influenced to think, yeah, Trump is not doing his job, is not doing his mandate. But when it comes down to the essence of affordability, we have to break it down into parts. Like what one is like about the strength of the currency. If you debase it, you create inflation, and create inflation makes everything more expensive for the people, and that kind of ties into like how government spends, and government has a spending problem. And then you look at about competition. Uh, Government, when it ties to big business, prevents competition or makes competition a lot harder for smaller businesses. So if you allow more competition, everything gets cheaper. You could look at $2,000 TVs. You flash forward like 3 years, or like $600. A year or two after that, or like $300 TVs. You look at phone companies when uh, well, this kind of ties with deregulation, but another way to make things more affordable is about deregulating and cutting red tape. Look at the cafe standards with cars. Uh, the standards of uh, uh, miles per gallon and shifting to electric is definitely increased the value of the vehicle unnecessarily. And if you think regulation simplifies or makes it cheaper, it actually doesn't. A good example is looking at a gas tank. Like the old gas tank, you unplug it and put it in. Like the new gas tank, you have to press and push to push gas. It makes it like really complex. Uh, and then you look at like about deregulation or regulation, red tape. We haven't built a new refinery. We haven't built a new nuclear plant. Some of the refineries are being shut down because they've aged out, and they can. So it increases the cost of energy. And what Biden did with the Keystone Pipeline, shutting it down with Canada, made fuel more expensive.
Look,
And
the
then you
other
look
day,
at
Marcus said, pardon a real quick input here. The other day, Doug Berger, my Secretary of the Interior, said we don't know we don't just have to drill, baby, drill. We have to mine, baby, mine, with regard to rare earth.
Yeah. Well, I had a conversation with this one lady when I was working with the federal government, and she says, and she was from Canada, a German who became a Canadian citizen who wants to become a U.S. citizen. She made an offhanded comment like the Keystone Pipeline that was good that was shut down. I was like, why? I was like, it's not good for the environment. We don't need it. Then I stress test her argument. I go, say you live in a house or you own a house. Is it cheaper to have water delivered to you by truck or by a pipe? And she says by pipe. And I go, yeah, because you want the cost of water to be like 2 to 3 cents a gallon versus $2 to $3 a gallon. And I go, that's an example of transporting of energy, making it more expensive or not. When you shut down the Keystone Pipeline, it made the cost of fuel or the perception of fuel more expensive. And
Yeah,
then another thing is about wages, about in relation to affordability. The government has shifted our ability to be good wage earners. We from NAFTA, we lost our manufacturing capability to where we became a more service orientated economy. And now it got to a point now we're a gig economy to supplement the service economy. Then another thing about affordability is housing costs, and some of the things I'm mentioning is going to loop into each other. So uh, there's an estimate that like 1/4 of regulation could be tacked on to the cost of housing. And if you don't believe that's valid, you could watch a Thomas Sowell interview talking about cost of housing, and he made a comparison. Like a $200,000 house in Texas is worth $800,000 in California. It could be the same house, same acreage, but it's because of regulation and zoning and permitting that increased the value of the overall cost.
Marcus, you don't have
Then,
to open the floor. The house we bought 3 years ago here. If we picked up the house we live in now and we love our house, and I dropped it into a analogous 55 plus community in Miami, it would double and a half in price just from here to Miami, 2.5 hour drive
Right.
from Vero Beach, Indian River County to Miami-Dade County. You don't need to, you don't need, but need to go uh, halfway across the nation.
another factor of affordability would be like the cost of goods and services. So, uh, and then that kind of loops back to about competition. But what the thing about it is, if you look at all of Trump's or most of Trump's executive orders, he addressed it all to tackle uh, uh, dealing with competition, deregulation, about wages, about the affordable housing, cost of goods and services. And but the thing is, it takes time to write an economy. I mentioned like 18 to 24 months. You look at Reagan, he had to under Volcker, he had to raise the interest rates to keep inflation under control.
It was 14, and the quarter peaked at 14. And by the way, Raul, what do you think of I looked at it. You just said Reagan. We were moving from Miami to LA for me to start in 1982, the the dental program at USC. And for my wife to get a job, granted, she was a recent immigrant. She didn't have the job skills that she later acquired. But it was very, very difficult because the job market was still choked, particularly in LA. But back then, there was a different maturity and awareness and the population and perhaps patience. There wasn't the internet. There wasn't I want it now, or the sense of entitlement. I don't think that now we're fighting people that expect they were complacent to let it all go to shit for 4 years, but now suddenly they're very demanding. Raul, your take on that they want an immediate fix or they're going to hold you accountable if you don't
No,
fix it.
listen, I think a lot of the things that Marcus has been talking about, you know, President Trump is trying to correct a series of mistakes that I would argue have been made not just by the Biden administration, not just by the Obama administration, but by the Bush administration before him, by the Clinton administration before him.
Prescription drugs under Bush.
Yeah, we have these are problems that have been accumulating for decades now, and
Yes.
Marcus talked about how sometimes government policy screws things up, right? And I go back to the things that I've said before. Ross Perot saying, warning us back in the '90s that the minute those free trade agreements were signed, that enormous sucking sound you were going to hear was going to be the sound of U.S. jobs, flowing overseas, going down the drain and flowing overseas to China and Vietnam. And he was absolutely correct. And that goes to Marcus's point that, the government sometimes screws things up royally. Now, in that case, the government, had it been, thoughtful, could have said, well, gee, let's figure out a way. If we know that this is going to cause us, and everybody knew that there was going to be enormous, job losses. It wasn't just Ross Perot. Everybody was screaming bloody murder, that there was going to be fundamental changes. But we naively thought that, our capitalist system would just kind of rearrange everything, and, people would relocate to other communities to find jobs. And guess what? Labor is not that mobile, right? People like, the city that they grew up in, their community, their state. They're not willing. You can't tell a textile worker from North Carolina, hey, pack up and go out to California and learn how to code, and you'll get a job in Silicon Valley. It just doesn't work that way. So we created this enormous disruption over decades now, made all sorts of bad decisions, got ourselves into these endless wars that Trump talks about, that cost us literally trillions of dollars, right? Government kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, to the point where we really can't afford it anymore. The debt increased exponentially. If you look at the increases in this debt number, where you really see the enormous shock is, right at the end of the Bush administration, the beginning of the Obama administration. Obama did, in fact, we can, he was given the minute he took office, he came into a recession. Okay. And then what did he do? As a good Democrat that he is, he said, well, we're going to fix this by spending a hell of a lot more money. And so, the economy went into a recession, and his solution was, what, we're going to spend and spend, and we're going to give out more loans, and we're going to take on more debt, and we're going to try and reactivate the economy, prime the pump again. And you saw that government debt figure just skyrocket, right? And then in 2020 we had COVID. We spent gazillions of dollars, and then once COVID was under control, Trump lost office. Was replaced by Biden. Rightly, wrongly, legally, illegally, whatever. But Biden comes in and says, "Oh, no, wait a second. The pandemic isn't over yet. We got to spend a few billions of dollars more to get the economy back on track." So the whole thing has been a mess, man. And I think what you're seeing Trump doing now is the man is like a maniac, man. I mean, he's doing all sorts of things, a lot of which I agree with, some things that quite frankly startle me. Okay. But I think he's trying to do the right thing.
Marcus.
Yeah, just to go with that, because like I said, some of the topics I mentioned overlap, like with wages and competition, a good and helping our manufacturing base. The tariff, when you really look at it, is a great idea, because and you look at Chinese steel, that killed the steel mills in the U.S.
Mhm.
And working in a steel mill, that was good money.
Mhm.
So if you add tariffs to Chinese steel, what we're doing is strengthening the steel industry base. So
Well, what's left of it? But the problem is, like in the steel industry, so
Just-
much of it went overseas that we don't have a whole lot of it left over here, right? And but now you're putting, I mean, we still needed steel. So whether it was being made in the US or it wasn't being made in the US, okay, if let's say 80% of that production got shifted overseas, we still needed X amount of steel to run our economy. And whether it was manufactured domestically or foreign, we needed to have steel. And so for now we're importing foreign steel, which supposedly was cheaper, but now we are adding a tariff to it. So we're bringing it back to the price of what it might have been had it remained domestically, and we're passing those costs along to the end consumer. That's where you start getting into some.
but it takes time. It takes time to
Of
correct.
course.
So like to repurpose or reactivate steel mills take time. You need investing, and then the issue like cutting red tape to open up a steel mill. I mean, we haven't built a nuclear power plant for 40, 50 years
Right.
commercially. I mean, military, get nuclear subs, nuclear carriers, but then you look at AI. So all these executive orders
Yeah.
is doing to just to countermand that.
Well,
So
Lee Sullivan is helping with the permitting, by the way. When you touched on permitting just now, he has a couple of times commented in the past, I'm the president, but the most important guy in the room is right there. And he points to Lee Zeldin with the EPA, because a lot of the EPA was used as a bludgeon. It was used to stymie any progress. Well, we're not going to permit you, so you're not going to build that plant. You're not going to make that next step.
It gets back to what Reagan said, man. Government is not the solution. It ends up being the problem more often than not. I think politicians have to do something to feel productive. And if they don't pass laws and if they don't pass more regulations, they don't feel they're doing their job. I think quite the contrary. I think, the fewer laws and the fewer regulations that are passed and the more that we rescind is probably where they should be focused on. But that's what they do. And it just makes life, more difficult. Trump is trying to use the power of the federal government, and he's intervening as well. And
look at prescription drugs.
Yeah.
Like all it took was a friend to, make an argument
Right.
like, hey, prescriptions drugs are avoidable. Like why is drugs in India, Canada, and Mexico cheaper than in the US, and it's the same drug?
Right.
And then he made a mandate.
Yeah, I read a fascinating article this afternoon, which I think is spot on. That also kind of concerns me. This is one of the things that startles me about Trump, right? And just like we criticized the Obama administration for trying to pick winners and losers, right? For spending billions on a battery plant that never got off the ground, never made money. They built some huge factory, it never really worked. And that was an example of the Obama administration picking and winning losers. That's the phrase you always hear, right? The government should not be in the business of picking and winning losers. But what has Trump done in the last couple of months? He bought 10% of Intel on behalf of the US government. The government poured $12 billion into Intel because he thinks it's a strategic necessity for us to compete in the chip industry and to beef up our chip manufacturing so we don't lose that race again to the Chinese. Yesterday, he came out and said, hey, NVIDIA, those, super fast H200 chips that you're dying to sell to China, guess what? I'm going to let you sell them to quote unquote approved buyers in China. But the deal is you got to give a 25% cut of whatever you sell to China to the US government. That just blew my mind. It's like, whoa, wait a second. What's going on here, man? The federal government is basically saying, you talk about picking winners and losers. And what this article was talking about is, if you think about what Trump is doing right now, he's kind of doing what the Chinese have been doing now for decades, right? Sort of this top-down management where the government is stepping in to protect strategic industries. And that is what Trump is doing with chips, with artificial intelligence, quantum computing, with certain rare earths, that type of stuff. He's putting the power of the purse and the power of the federal government into what he considers to be the key industries of the futures. And this guy's argument in the article was, and I think, quite frankly, I mean, not that I'm, should be offering investment advice, but he's basically saying, if you want to pick winners and losers, don't bet against the house. I mean, if Trump is pouring money into Intel, Nvidia, rare earths, artificial intelligence, maybe that's where you should be too, because that's where the government's putting their billions and billions of dollars. And a rising tide lifts all ships. Jump on the bandwagon.
China, by the way, let me come in. I've been listening to both of you a little bit. China, I saw just this Sunday, is robbing us blind with espionage, with intellectual property theft, with technology theft. So as far as selling Nvidia or a commission or no commission, no cut, no piece of the action, I wouldn't sell jack shit to China. China is robbing us. China is our biggest enemy. It isn't Russia. Russia's not going to bomb us. Russia's not. China is getting ready to be able to take down our infrastructure here, to shut off our water supply, to create mass chaos, the stuff you see on apocalyptic movies, so that they can move on Taiwan. That concerns me about China. And in a little bit, I want to get into another part of this, and that is all those things, Raul, that you very well laid out that are happening, which of course can't happen fast enough. How does that translate? I'm gonna create. You all have heard of Joe Sixpack. Well, I'm gonna create, instead of Joe Sixpack, Derek Latte. Derek Latte is your little snot nosed punk ass kid who thinks that he should live in any city he wants, no matter how much it costs, and that he should have whatever car, and that he should have before he does. And if Derek Latte doesn't get that, it's somebody else's fault. And by God, he's going to punish whoever he deems that to be in the election. Go ahead, Marcus.
I just want to postulate a question to Raul, since he's a finance guy. What do you think about a commodity-backed currency for the U.S. dollar? Because I'm just kind of segueing back to with Russia, when they were being sanctioned with their invasion of Ukraine, they were going through like runaway inflation, and to hedge against that, they pegged the ruble to gold to stabilize it. So kind of like somewhat a gold back, but my take is like a commodity backed currency, because right now the dollar has really no value. It's just paper money. But when you have but it shouldn't be just like one or two commodities, but like multitudes of commodities like gas, oil, metals, agriculture, to diversify the commodity of the currency, to prevent high swings and low swings, but to keep the dollar strong, hence to keep the purchasing power strong, to make things more affordable to the consumer.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Look, I think the cat is out of the bag. I think that, it would be extremely difficult for us to go back, whether to a gold-based or even a commodity-based currency. However, I think that one of the things that Trump is trying to do to restabilize the economy, for example, drill, baby, drill, right? I mean, if we have an economy that is cranking out a lot of oil, and that to a certain extent means that our dollar is backed with something, our economy is backed with a real economy that is producing something that the rest of the world needs, whether it's oil or in the future, these data centers, that are becoming a commodity themselves, right? I mean, that's the new future commodity. I think that we are sort of if we become the U.S. has always historically been the largest producer of grain, right? And we still are, but the Chinese have been punishing us, halting the purchase of soybeans and rice and other products because of the tariffs that we inputted on them, right? And I think Trump is, I look at tariffs almost as like a form of like a consumption-based tax, right? That yes, we're going to be paying for it, but it's going to raise, as we're seeing, it's raising an enormous amount of revenue. It gives the president a lot more options. I think at the same time, this whole issue of, drill, baby, drill, strategic investments, incentives for blue collar workers, for trades, for things of that sort. The man is literally trying to rebuild the U.S. economy while operating it at the same time. It's kind of like building an airplane and flying it at the same time. He's literally trying to rebuild the airplane that we're flying at the same time that or flying the economy that we have at the same time that he's trying to rebuild it. It's an enormous undertaking. I think he'll be successful. I think he's onto something. But as you mentioned, Marcus, this is not something you don't take the world's largest economy and turn it around from one day to the other. But getting back to this whole issue of affordability, which is kind of what we're supposed to be talking about, I think the biggest stride there has been in energy costs, right? And during the Biden administration, when you saw oil, got above $100 a barrel at one point, and you were seeing prices at the gas pump of $3.50, $4. That is, in fact, what started off a lot of this inflation that we are saddled with right now. Why? Because everything in America moves on oil, whether it's railroads or delivery vans or airplanes, you name it. It all requires fossil fuels to move from point A to point B.
Or power, like the grid.
Or power. And not only that, people forget, for example, fertilizer. In order to produce fertilizer, you need enormous amounts of natural gas. Okay, if the price of natural gas is through the roof, the price of your fertilizer stock is also going to go up.
Which increases the cost of food.
Right.
Yes.
So all of that stuff, the fertilizer is going up, the fuel costs going up. Of course, your head of cabbage is going to go, I do the shopping in my house, so I realize, man, it wasn't that long ago that I could buy a head of lettuce for $1. Most supermarkets, right? Now, maybe if I go to Walmart, I'm lucky to find it for $1.50. Okay. But if I do to go to Publix or one of the other local grocery stores, I'm probably paying $2 or $3 for a head of lettuce, right? That's outrageous, man. To me, that's I see those prices, and yes, some of them have stabilized, some of them have come back, particularly the oil and gas, but we still have a long ways to go, and and it's really, really hard. And I'll tell you this, as an economist, right, that once inflation rears its ugly head, it's very hard to sort of scale it back. So the only way you solve this problem in the long run is by increasing wages, right? And why is that going to be difficult now? Because all of a sudden we have on the horizon this thing called artificial intelligence, which is telling us that we're going to have, we're going to need less jobs rather than more jobs. Hopefully it will create other opportunities. But, people like me, age 68, we're probably not going to see those opportunities anyway, right? So, our time has passed. But hopefully, for future generations, they will be making a lot more money. There will be a much more productive economy.
Even if you go into a place like a fast food joint or similar, they don't have people behind the counter. Welcome to Wendy's. May I take your order? Now it's push these buttons and do it yourself. You go to the supermarket, you go to Walmart, to Sam's, to anything, Costco. I haven't been to a Costco in a while, but I know in Sam's, it's a handful, 3-4 registers, but 12 self checkouts, and it's pretty quick, and that's efficient. That's not that bad. The one here is never really that terribly busy, even like around Christmas or New Year's. But what does that mean? 12 or 15 fewer jobs for low-income workers.
Just to add on to that, under Biden, the cost of energy, total energy, went up like 36%, but it doesn't just translate it to the backs of the consumer. It also, a lot of the businesses absorb the cost as well unnecessarily. And one thing that was affected was the transportation sector, okay? Because the cost of fuel, even diesel, there was a period of time where there was like a 30-month national supply of diesel, and diesel runs trucks, and the trucks are the ones that ship freight from one coast to the other or one state to the other. So you get like a breakdown on the supply chain, a serious breakdown. I
Mhm.
remember like, just say going to Wendy's. Hey, I want to get some a chocolate shake. We don't have any shake. We ran
Yeah.
out. Or you
No.
go to Zaxby's for wings, and they don't have curly fries. There was a serious breakdown on the supply chain, especially with food as well.
Yeah.
Isn't
And
that ironic?
it takes a time for a company to absorb it because they can only absorb so much before they
Yeah.
uh, get, pass it on to the consumer.
Marcus, talking about pricing costs on the consumer. I don't know if you saw this article came out a few days ago. And this is where I think Trump's tariffs are going to run into, I think, a brick wall because the Supreme Court heard a case about a week ago, right, on the subject of the tariffs. And apparently, sitting in the front row were Scott Bessent and Ludwig, or what's his name, Litnick, the
Ludwig.
Commerce Secretary, right?
Yeah.
Howard
They were
Lutnick.
sitting in the front row, and apparently they were not very comfortable with what they were hearing because the way the arguments were going kind of indicated that the Supreme Court was not sold on the fact that the president had in fact the legal authority to pass all of these tariffs, strictly on the basis of his executive authority, using different interpretations of laws that Congress has passed over several decades. And just a few days ago, Costco, okay, you talked about Costco. Costco is now suing the federal government for some, incredible amount of money because basically what they're saying is, listen, you know, we decided to absorb these costs rather than pass them along to the consumer. And in doing so, we've taken a huge hit to our earnings, okay, because we chose to keep our customers happy. We wanted to preserve our market share. And so we took a huge hit to our bottom line, right? Or not a huge hit, but I mean, their operating profits were substantially curtailed. If now the courts find that these tariffs were illegal, okay, you, Uncle Sam, are going to have to reimburse me because you hurt my business in a very dramatic way, right? Now, whether in fact, Costco can, sue the government that way, that might be a whole nother legal issue. But, you know, uh, that's where you're seeing that, um, Trump has been doing the best he can with the limited options that he has within the legal and regulatory framework that he has. But he's not, I mean, despite what the Democrats would like to characterize him as, he's not a king. I mean, he's got to work within, the authorities that he has. He's got to work within the fact that Congress has certain responsibilities. He has certain responsibilities. The Supreme Court can throw everything out the window. So it's not an easy job what the guy is doing, man. It's pretty
I
stressful.
want to I want to move this to what is the other half of the title. Earlier this evening, before we began tonight's episode, I saw a map. You always see the red blue map. This many districts, that many districts, states that were won, and this map was an affordability map. And new thing I'm going to say coming up is going to shock you, but it was color coded light from a light green, which is very affordable. Florida is like second, like a medium green, and the worst was a deep red, which ironically were new red states. It was New York, Illinois, California. So, Washington, I believe. The point is that those are the places, and they talked about the cost of goods, the cost of gasoline. They also showed a graph of that. It was double plus for filling a tank in Florida as opposed to filling a tank in the same vehicle, same amount of gas in California. None of that is a shock. But what I'm looking at is getting back again to the fictitious Derek Latte. Okay, Derek wants to live in New York City, or he wants to live in a Tenderloin district in San Fran, but he thinks that it's not fair that he's paying twice as much gas as his buddy in Fort Pierce. So he wants to blame somebody for it. This is where messaging comes in. I don't. Those states are not going to do anything, or they're going to resist like all hell because they're blue Democrat-run states. They don't care. Look at Minnesota. I don't want to digress into the Somali thing. We'll definitely have to do a future topic on that because that's been a real can of shit that they've uncovered. But if those places, I think the balkanization will continue. Those states will get more expensive. People will leave, and the more people that leave are going to be people that theoretically are not happy with the prices because the
Mhm.
weather didn't suddenly change in California or New York that made that person want to flee. It's the economic factors and crime.
Yeah.
So the ones that stay behind, they're the ones that are drinking the Kool-Aid. What I'm seeing is that we may see an even more divided election. I'm concerned about losing the House and Senate in the midterms, but the messaging that is required to drive that home. It's not every place in the country that's so bad. It's the places that double down on failed policies
Mhm.
that are hurting the most. If they are hell bent on doing that, so be it. We cannot stop them, but don't bring the rest of the country down with them. Now, I saw, we always hear Democrats message better. I don't believe that was true in 2024. The Democrats did not message better, apart from the fact they had a disastrous candidate, but they did not. Uh, Watley and Lara Trump message much better, and we got to, and plus they supervise elections and watch polls, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm wondering what kind of messaging, since that's half of tonight's topic, do we think is needed, and can it be done to make people aware of the things, of the positives that both of you have mentioned tonight?
Well, there's other things that he's doing to tackle affordability. One is dealing with legal and illegal immigration. With illegals, you get the issue of where uh, businesses would hire for lower wages, which also would depress the wage market for certain sectors. Look at like the housing market. I would ask like some contractors, like, how's illegals affected your ability to compete with bigger contractors? And he says, hey, one of them says, as a roofer, he had to uh, cut 3/4 of his workforce, and it's just him and his son doing a roof. It's like he can't compete. So then you get with like the agricultural sector as well.
He
But
can't compete. Why? Because his workers were illegal.
no, he was competing against bigger contractors that could underbid them.
Okay,
And
but,
they
but
probably had
it wasn't
illegal.
because he had illegal workers and they left the job. Is that
No, he had regular workers, but
okay?
he had to fire them because of that. And then you get like people who get uh, these visas, like it was H-1Bs, where you hire somebody who's a tech guy, and you can hire him cheaper being under a work visa than you would with a U.S. citizen. So I mean, he's doing everything he can, and everywhere just to kind of depress the cost, make it affordable, but the cost with like how government spends as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and look, he's getting pushback in certain sections on that H1 B visa thing.
yeah,
He's gotten a tremendous amount of pushback from Silicon Valley, from Apple, from Microsoft, saying, "Hey guys, this is the model that we've been working with for decades of bringing in all these engineers from India, and now you're changing the rules of the game with us, and we can't pivot as quickly as you would like us to pivot." And we don't think that there's enough engineers in America right now specifically trained for those roles that we need. Now you could say, well, they're just blowing smoke up the president's ass. They just want to make more money. Maybe that's the case, but he's getting pushback on a lot of these things, which may be good ideas. Obviously we want to employ Americans rather than have to import workers from overseas. But you can't, turn a ship around, that quickly. It's simply not feasible. But this whole crisis, man, if you think about it, even the term that we're using, right? Where does that term come from? The affordability term. That term came from Zohar Mandami. He ran his whole campaign in New York City around the subject of affordability. New
The
York
new
City
home and
become
change.
affordable. If you elect me as your next mayor, you huddled masses yearning to be free. I'm going to give you free supermarkets and free bus transportation and free this and free that, and I'll just wave my magic wand. And a few months after I'm in office, New York City will suddenly be affordable again. And that's where the whole affordability word came into play.
Yeah, it's all
And what
bullshit.
happened? Zohan Mandami got elected. Okay. And all of a sudden, every Republican is running around like they're chicken with their head cut off saying, oh my God, this is the canary in the coal mine that we're going to lose the midterm elections. We have to return and pivot. And now we have to focus on affordability because, Zohan Mandami won in New York City.
Yeah,
And the Democrats, to their credit, they jumped on that, man. I mean, they're like, yeah, I mean, and now they're trying to spin it that that Trump's not moving fast enough on a problem that they created. I mean, that's the irony of this whole thing, right?
it's the messaging part of the next topic. Let's not forget, Raul, that it wasn't just Duran who won. Mickey Sherrill won. Abigail Spanberger won. And a complete scumbag that said, I'd shoot my opponent two bullets in the head and I'd kill his wife and children won. And a lot of that, Trump says he's not on the ballot. Bullshit. Trump is very much on the ballot. Very
Mhm.
much on the ballot. Because they're just like we nationalized the border, which is a brilliant move that I think really cost partly in a great part cost Democrats the election of last year. They are nationalizing the Trump factor, the Trump derangement. Uh, the other thing is maybe the best thing and by the time a year comes around and we're at the midterms, Mamdani's election victory may actually be a terrific gift to the GOP because we know that there's no way in hell that any of that's going to work. That's 2 days after getting after winning, when the smoke cleared from the room and the rhetoric died down. What did he do? He went with his tail between his legs to visit the White House, and he started asking for donations. There is no way. And Hochul, who's running for re-election, said, "No fucking way! I'm going to give you free buses, Zoran, and free markets." In a year, that same impatience, but again, it comes down to messaging, messaging, messaging. Perception is reality. That same impatience that is hurting the Republicans can be turned on the Democrats if it's done deftly, if it's done with skill. Look at Mondani. You guys think that's a solution? Look at this city a year later. It's probably going to be bleeding. I think people are leaving already. Real estate prices, he's going to be a real shit show, and that has to be nationalized. I think that would be
Let's
a
see,
big
man. I mean,
key.
I think affordability is more than a buzzword, though, right? And it's more than just a talking point for the midterm elections. I think, quite frankly, that we do have a problem. I think that there are some prices that have gotten way out of control. Um, and I think that there are a lot of people that are feeling a lot of pain. Okay, people on fixed incomes. That yes, it's great that their gas prices have come down, but they're still having lots of difficulty making ends meet when they go to pay for their grocery bills, their utility bills, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's a lot of angst on the part of young people that are coming out into the workforce, even those that have good, solid degrees and are finding, gee, I studied computer engineering, but now I may have difficulty finding a job because nobody's going to need my coding skills or my programming skills because artificial intelligence is going to replace me. So there is a lot of stuff going on. That leads me to believe, and some numbers that I've seen. I interviewed a guy the other day that I've known for quite some time, young fellow to me in his 50s, right? But this guy, I invited him to talk about the subject of affordability, and he came with a bunch of solid graphs over and over again, saying, "Hey, look at how expensive more homes have become over the past few years." Again, for a variety of different reasons, right? But the fact of the matter is, look, the one headline that caught my eye that everybody was talking about for the longest time: the average age of a new homeowner in America
40
today is 40 years old.
versus 23, 24.
That is
Mark,
insane, man. That is insane, right? I mean, I bought my first house when I was in my, I think, early 30s or something, 30, 31
Yeah.
years old, right? Um, and I think for somebody to have to wait until they're 40 and already have, maybe 3 or 4 or 5, kids in tow to buy their first home, that's not the American dream, man. That's a really, to me, that is the canary in the coal mine, right? I mean, there's something wrong with that. Um, and I don't think you solve that problem by giving everybody, 50-year mortgages, which means that it'll take you forever to build equity in your home. No, you gotta get those prices back down. You gotta, get this inflation under control. The Fed's inflation target is 2%. Right now, we're still closer to 3% than we are to 2%. So, we're still above what historically has been the Fed's target for inflation. And by the way, the other thing, you know, and I've read a lot about this lately. The basket that they use to calculate the inflation numbers is all bullshit. I mean, nobody really uses those. What's in that basket, it doesn't really reflect the current costs of most people. Um, you know, Today, I mean, I know that historically as a banker, okay, the rule of thumb was always that your mortgage, your housing expenses, should never exceed 30% of your after tax, after or before tax, well, 30% of your earnings. Okay. Nowadays, most people that you talk to, okay, they're paying 50, 60% on housing. All right. That's not the American dream. I'm sorry. So
Go ahead.
whether you want to call it affordability, sticky inflation, turning the aircraft carrier of the economy around, whatever terminology you want to use, it's important, I think, for everybody, Republicans, Democrats, no party affiliation, to recognize that the American dream is slipping away for a lot of people, and Trump, more than anybody else, needs to recognize that. And I think he has been kind of bitch slapped these last couple of weeks because he's been spending too much time focusing on the Nobel Peace Prize and forgetting that he's was elected to make America great again, right? And I say that I'm kind of exaggerating there because I don't really think he lost sight of the ball, okay? But I think that he was in danger of getting some pushback, and I think he has been quite correctly pushed into a course correction, and that's why he's in Pennsylvania right now, talking, in a very contentious state, the state of Pennsylvania, a lot of blue collar workers,
Energy.
state, won the presidential campaigns for him, and he's there making that course correction and telling people, I hear your pain, which is absolutely critical.
Marcus, go ahead. You wanted to chime in on some of this.
Yeah, I remember buying a house in Slidell, Louisiana, back in like 96, 97, 3 bed, 2 bath, maybe like a quarter acre for like 96,000.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I got out in 2005, maybe like 2010, I was in Miami dealing with the vending machine business, and one of my many accounts were with car dealerships, and I look at the price of a car, and it was like 30K, and I'm thinking like 3 cars equal the value of my house back in '96, or one truck, and trucks could be like almost 100,000.
Yeah.
And
Nowadays, your Ram, Laramie edition pickup truck, it's $80,000-$90,000 sticker price.
Yeah.
Maybe you get it if you're lucky. You drive out of the dealership for 60 or 70, right? But who the hell? And by the way, they're having trouble selling them now because the affordability crisis is now staring Ford and General Motors in the face. And again, you've seen those headlines over and over again in the financial press that they thought they could get away with higher prices because during the pandemic there weren't enough cars on the lots, and the chip shortage and all that stuff, and they jacked up their prices, and people kept buying them, and now all of a sudden people are saying, no fucking way, I'm paying $75,000 for an F-150.
Yeah,
Well,
you made a good point that inflation, once it rears its head, it's hard to push back in the genie in the bottle. But the thing is, we've always had inflationary periods, and the thing is, we've been conditioned, brainwashed to think that uh, depressions are bad, but recessions we could tolerate. And the thing is, if the costs of goods keep going up and up and up, and we never have a depression, which I believe is a good course correction,
Yeah.
because then what is a depression? It means like everything is the cost is actually going down. Everything's being depressed.
Yeah.
And I think as a world economy, as a national, we need an occasional mini depression every now and then to bring the cost down for people.
Yeah, and you know what I think Mark is getting to that point. We haven't experienced a serious depression in a long period of time, or even a recession in a long period of time. And I think what you're suggesting is that might be kind of healthy for the economy. Okay. But unfortunately, politicians don't want to consider that as something good, right? So the answer is always, okay, Mr. Federal Reserve Chairman, start printing money again and get us out of this mess, right? As opposed to having, because if you think about what's the job of the Federal Reserve, they have two main objectives. Number one, avoid inflation, and number three, keep the economy humming with no unemployment, right? So they're very contradictory terms many times, as they are right now. But like you say, sometimes a course correction is what is needed in
And,
order to
and
get
a
things.
lot of economists would position that it's like, hey, we need the bubble to pop,
Yeah,
for the price to correct itself. Like we have a real estate bubble.
yeah,
It was artificially inflated, and people say, no, 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 this is going to last forever. But the reality set in where it became unaffordable, and then you had a pop. You had a lot of foreclosures, but you know what? It made for a person who
yeah.
saved their money be able to afford a house, because then you get it at a cheaper value.
Right.
well, the dot-com bubble, same thing with the dot-com bubble. Companies were inflated ridiculously, artificially, to be worth billions, and that imploded. The thing about having what you're saying, it's like lancing the boil, but no political party wants to be in power when the boil gets lanced, because
Yeah,
the post is going to spill on them, and they're going to get rejected,
yeah,
and that's
It's
part of the problem.
what it's doing. It's kicking the can or delaying the inevitable.
yeah,
That's
And
why, though.
I remember there was like a president who allowed a depression to occur or a recession to occur instead of having government intervene. I think it was uh, Harrison. I forget it. It was, but the thing is, like with FDR, he made the depression worse, where it lasted 10 years,
Yep.
and compared to this other president where it was it's like a fever. The fever runs a course, and it was over within like 18 to 24 months, just allowing the market to fix this bubble, and for price stabilization. But but the thing is, we haven't let that happen. So we're
yeah,
just making it more worse and worse and worse, making it unaffordable.
yeah. As I hear you talk about all this stuff, man, I'm reminded. There's an elderly couple down here that I consider to be my second set of parents, if you will. I've known them for Jesus, half a century practically, or if, at this point, and they're now in their, I think they're both like 90 or 91 years old, but uh, they still, I mean, they were young when the recession hit, back in the 20s and 30s and whatnot. Again, they were children back then, but they remember the pain that inflicted. And to this day, that couple they've got a ball of, rubber bands, all like, they save their rubber bands, they recycle stuff. They're very, careful with their money, right? They don't have a lot of credit. They still live in the same home that they bought. Carlos, out in Westchester, I think they paid something like, $15,000-$20,000 for it back in the 60s or something, and they still live in that house today. Obviously, that house is now worth probably, six here in Miami, $600,000-$700,000.
Yes.
They don't know a penny on it.
The property taxes are more
He
than they pay.
retired from the Coast Guard. She retired as a nurse from Jackson Memorial Hospital. They have a state pension. They are, if you look at their savings accounts and, what they own, they're very comfortable, No
I got
worries.
I got two analogies for that. Like the free market always keeps the value and discards inefficiency. That's basic rule of thumb. So, but when you allow the government to intervene, it promotes bad behavior to continue. A good example would be like the ice truck back in before refrigeration. If you remember watching like the Three Stooges, like Mo, Larry, or Curly would grab like a block of ice and it become like a cube by the time it reaches a person.
Mm-hmm.
But with refrigeration, it made the ice truck company obsolete. But when you allow the market to really work that, so an ice truck company goes bankrupt, but you know what? There's people, the meat packing, they go,
Mhm.
you know what? I could buy that uh, place for 40 cents on the dollar, which allows me to expand in an affordable, efficient
Yeah.
way. Then you look at like people could buy these trucks like for routes, and they could buy it cheap.
Yeah, so that Marcus gets back to what I was saying earlier. I mean that yes, this economy that we have, this capitalism that we operate under, is in fact, been demonstrated over time to be the most efficient way to manage an economy and allocate and reallocate, sources and balance supply and demand over long periods of time. But it's not perfect, right? And to your point, sometimes when government starts to interfere in that, it can send things out of whack. It can then also, overcorrect when it tries to fix the problem that they created. Okay. But I think part of what the lessons that I think we need to learn from all of this is, and I say this all the time, and I'm as devout a capitalist as anybody on earth, is that, this is the best system, but it's not perfect, right? And we have a lot of very smart people in this country, and we need to make sure that we are tapping into those very smart people to help us fix the problems when they occur without making the problem worse or creating some other mess in the process. And the reason I say that is because when we had that huge, loss of jobs back in the 90s, if back then Clinton had said, "Hey, listen, I know we're going to lose a lot of jobs. Let's bring in the best and brightest minds in America, and let's figure out how we're going to reemploy all of these people that we know are going to get lost," which entailed creating an industrial policy. But we didn't do that. We just left it up to the market to sort of figure it out. And guess what? Getting that back to my point, people are not mobile the way,
Yeah, but the market responds to government intervention. And
huh?
the market responds to government intervention.
Yes.
And the thing is, it's like, I'll give you another analogy. The housing crisis, Sheraton Lehman collapsed. They didn't prop it up, but they propped up other banks on a dime of the U.S. taxpayer.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, my take is, if we let some of these banking institutions fail, smaller banks would be able to say, hey, you know what? I could buy shares of Lehman for 5 cents on the dollar and allows me to expand nationwide.
Yeah.
That's the market working. But as you mentioned, uh, elected officials, they're scared on the market. They believe in government intervention, but it just makes it worse, makes it,
Yeah.
this unaffordability to
Did,
follow.
did you guys did you guys did you guys see by any chance that story of that? This came out late last week. It was an Australian influencer that was here in the U.S. I guess doing videos and traveling around the country and getting to know what the U.S. was like. And this fellow apparently was in, I don't know if he was in a Costco or one of these big stores, and he ran across this elderly gentleman. I think his last name is Bombas, Bambas, 88-year-old guy who was, working as, an inventory clerk in a supermarket, right? And this influencer started interviewing him, and the guy started telling him his life story. And one of those companies, that he worked for was General Motors, right? And General Motors was on the verge of bankruptcy back when Obama took office, as was Citibank and then Lehman, and a couple of them, were left to die. But the government thought that General Motors was too big to fail, so they intervened to prop them up. But General Motors had to get rid of a lot of pensions in order to reorganize themselves. They couldn't afford their pension plans anymore. And this poor guy, okay, lost his GM pension right when his wife was diagnosed with a serious disease, okay? He then had to sell his only, remaining, source of wealth, which was his home, in order to have the money to pay his wife's medical bills. She eventually died. So this guy ends up, without a pension, without a wife, without a house, and at age 88, he's still working in a supermarket to make ends meet, right? And the story has a happy ending because this guy, went and told the world what had happened to this guy. What did they do? GoFundMe page. And as of last Friday, they'd raised like $1.7 million, okay, to allow this guy to enjoy the last few years of his life without having to be, a stock clerk at a supermarket or a Costco or BJ's or wherever the hell he works at, right? And that just shows you, capitalism, doesn't always work the way it's supposed to work. Our government fails us, and fails the most needy at times, right? And you have situations like this, an 88-year-old guy, hardworking, did everything right according to the book, okay? And he still got screwed over, okay? Lost his pension, lost his wife, lost his house, and at age 88, he's still having to work, 40 hours a week to make ends meet. Is that what American capitalism is supposed to be about? Is that the American dream? I don't think so. Okay. And I don't think those stories are, few and far between. I think there's a hell of a lot of those stories out there, and there are more of them in recent years. And that's why we need to fix things.
Yeah, we need to fix it, but we also have issues where, first of all, there's no perfect system. When the better system comes up, better than capitalism, I want to hear about it. I don't think it exists.
No,
It's certainly not elsewhere in the world. It doesn't exist. The other thing, we're talking about having to endure some pain and some correction and some companies failing. We have a generation of young people, to your point, Raul, about capitalism. We have an enormous, what, two-thirds of the young and stupid, and yes, they are the young and stupid for whatever myriad of reasons, believe that socialism is the way they want to live. That's how Mamdani got elected. Those people are afraid to have a conversation. They can look someone in the eye and talk to them. They get triggered by making a phone call. They can only be texted. Do we think those people, those spineless little shits, do we think that they're going to endure any pain? No, they're not. And they think that capitalism.
Carlos, I would push back and I would tell you, okay, and I believe this to be true, that those young people that you criticize are in that situation. Why? Because the U.S. government kind of made them. And what do I mean by that? The U.S. government for decades has been telling everybody, you got to go to college. You got to go to college. And the U.S. government has basically said, don't worry about whether you can afford it or not. We're going to give you government guaranteed loans so that you can go to college. Okay. And guess what? When the banks and the lenders figured out, oh my God, I don't have to worry about whether this, kid that's going to study, gender studies for 4 years at Columbia. It's going to cost her, $250,000 to study gender studies for 4 years at Columbia. I don't really give a shit whether she can pay it back or not. I'll give her the money anyway because the money is guaranteed by Uncle Sam, or Uncle Sam gives her the money directly, right? And so we've created this generation of people that went off to college, studied whatever the hell they wanted, incurred massive amounts of debt. Why? Because either the government gave them the money at very cheap rates or incentivized banks and financial institutions to lend them the monies and back those loans up. And now all of a sudden we have this, incredibly well-educated group of young communists, okay, because they've been indoctrinated by the professors at these universities with degrees that aren't worth shit, but with, $250,000, $300,000, $400,000 of debt, which makes them angry. And angry at who? At the government. They gave them that money to go and get their shit degrees to begin with. Okay, that's what they're angry about.
And
so
now
we've created those problems, right?
Yeah, and here's my perspective. We did not. The government said, "Here's the money," but the government never said, "Don't worry, Snowflake. You're going to have a wonderful career as an influencer. You're going to have a terrific career in women's studies. You're going to have you're going to be crazy rich." Western civilizations. Nobody sold them that. They're lazy. These fuckers are lazy. They're entitled. It's bad parenting, and they have this idea that they're going to no matter what, they don't care, and I study whatever I want, and it's up to you, the society, to make it work for me. That's a lost generation. And yeah, the government is complicit. I do not debate that. The government is complicit, but some of them were being told what they wanted to hear.
I blame it all on the hippies from the 60s and 70s, man. All that pot smoking and free sex and stuff. I mean, it just, seriously, people laugh at it, but I think that that a lot of our current problems began with, that nutcase, whatever, Leary, whatever the guy's name was, that said, oh, should all be smoking LSD. There's, LSD is good for you. And this is nonsense and shit, free love, all this stuff that took place in the 70s and 80s. And it just, those hippies in San Francisco are the, 80-year-old, 90-year-old, geezers that you see in the supermarkets these days with the Birkenstockings, that all vote, Democrats and have pride flags on their SUVs, their electric SUVs.
And no kids. We're standing out there with in the New Kings Parade like a bunch of fucking morons. But hey, that's what we have. But the problem is,
it's their children, grandchildren that are causing these issues now. Unfortunately, I mean, I see it all the time.
Gen Z is beginning to turn that around. Gen Z, the youngest generation, is beginning to turn that around. They are beginning to look at things like blue collar, skill jobs, trades rather than degrees. Did you guys know that recently the SEC is getting more draw from college students than the Ivy League? As far as, and those degrees. Marcus, go ahead.
I think just to kind of wind down on this topic, I believe that in like 2.5, 3 years time, we're going to see a different economy. Just like I said, it's going to the ship is going to kind of correct itself. It's going to push in a better position in terms of the cost of energy. I think it's going to go. I think when Trump left, it was like maybe like $1.80 something a gallon.
Right.
And then it went up to like 3 something, almost $4 under Biden. I remember those Biden stickers next to the gas pump. I did it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So even for Trump now, Trump saying, "Hey, I lowered your gas prices, right? Put those stickers up on the gas pump."
Yeah, right. So I think we'll see a different economy in like 2 years' time at least.
No, listen, you're not the only one that's saying it, Marcus. There's a guy. His name is Torsten. Got a really weird name. Torsten, Torstn Slok, Slok. Torsten Slok. He is the chief economist for Apollo, which is a big, one of the biggest hedge funds in the world. And this guy, and I, I get his newsletter on a regular basis. And last week he had a very interesting graph that showed that his data point that he was focusing on was that because of the one big beautiful bill, and specifically the tax cuts that are in it, including the fact that you're going to be able to accelerate the depreciation on a new plant or factory or machinery whenever you buy it, okay? That the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, is now predicting that that will add 90 basis points, almost a full 1% to GDP growth next year in the United States, okay? And there's also another report, the OECD, the European countries, whatever, predicting that, for next year, global growth is going to slow down a little bit because of the tariffs, but this whole AI thing is going to make up for a lot of it. So we're still going to have robust growth, next year throughout the world, and strong growth here in the U.S. So Marcus, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think things are changing. You're going to start seeing it in 2026 and beyond. Hopefully, we'll start to see some of those effects before the midterms so that
Yes.
Trump can continue to control the government. Otherwise, it's going to be, two steps, one step forward, two steps back again.
Yeah, they lose the House and Senate, we are fucked. They lose the House and Senate, we are fucked. And let's, again, let's hope that Marcus's prediction rings true, and it does so on a timely basis.
I think in a perfect world, there should be a continuity of government. So after Trump will be Vance, Rubio. After that would be Rubio, DeSantis. But to drive the point, after like the 2 year mark, I think within the 5 to 10 year mark, we're going to see a renaissance. We're going to see a manufacturing boom because the plants would be built and everything would be in high gear. You're going to see a tech boom with AI because if you mentioned about like with AI, we're going to lose some jobs or you're going to gain some jobs. So with manufacturing, with AI, it'll be simpler, but you'll still employ people. Then you get like a focus on rebuilding our logistic base in terms of the military and our manufacturing base in terms of the military. So I think we're going to see a boom there. And then if Elon Musk kind of outdoes NASA, you're going to see another renaissance as well.
Yeah. No, listen, that AI thing is real. It's going to it's going to, increase productivity like, you wouldn't believe. I had a young family member that spent the weekend with me. He was down here for some business meetings. He's starting his own company. And he was telling me and showing me how his daughter, who's a very bright girl going to the University of Michigan. She's a pre-med student there. And she's also brilliant at like coding and software. And she taught my nephew, this is my grand niece, I guess, taught her dad, my nephew, how to use artificial intelligence to build out this, very robust software system for this new business that he's generating. And he had it subsequently, verified and looked over by some true data experts. And they all said, this thing's freaking genius, man. How long did it take you? How much money did you spend on this? When the guy told him, I said, yeah, it took me, 8 hours to do it, with some help from my daughter. I built out this incredible, accounting system and process orders and it's a telecommunications business and connect this and connect that. And they were just like blown away. And, but I, that's obviously just anecdotal data, but you're hearing more and more about that in terms of, this ability that artificial intelligence is going to really turbocharge businesses, but it's going to displace a lot of workers in the process. And so what happens. Elon Musk believes, if you believe Elon Musk, he thinks, that that at some point we're going to need a universal basic income because the robots will be running everything. I don't believe that, okay? But
Yeah.
he's the smartest guy in the world, they say, okay? So I think you need to pay attention to that. But man, yeah, there's going to be some revolutionary stuff in the next decade. I hope I'm around to see some of it. I think it's going to be, very positive. As long as the good Lord keeps me here on earth, I will hopefully be able to enjoy some of that.
Okay, so Marcus, any parting comments before we wrap up tonight?
No, I'm good.
All right. Well, this was a very spirited discussion, and there's a lot of stuff that was covered tonight, and it is pertinent. And again, we're ending off on a positive note amid all the negativity. Let's just hope that some of the stuff turns around and that the things that need to kick in do so on a timely manner. And with that, I bid you all good night.